It happened on what should have been a quiet Wednesday morning at the county courthouse. I was sitting there, one leg crossed over the other, hands folded neatly in my lap, pretending my heart wasn't hammering so loudly it echoed in my ears. The courtroom buzzed with the low murmur of lawyers, clerks, and other couples waiting for their own endings. And then he said it, loud enough for everyone to hear. We both agreed it was time to move on. Adam announced, voice slick and casual, like he was sharing news about selling an old car. I blinked once, then again. It took a second for the words to register, for the weight of them to settle onto my chest like wet concrete. Agreed, move on. He said it like we had sat at the kitchen table together, sipping coffee, smiling fondly at each other, and decided our marriage, 20 years of it, was no longer needed. But that wasn't how it had happened. Not even close. I glanced around the courtroom. A few strangers shifted uncomfortably. One woman, wearing a sharp gray suit, actually smirked, as if she were watching a reality show play out in real life. Even the judge raised an eyebrow, scribbling something down in his file, and Adam just stood there, hands stuffed in his pockets, the faintest smile playing at the corners of his mouth, like he'd already won, like none of it mattered. I gripped the small black folder sitting on my lap. My nails dug so deep into the leather that I almost tore it. Inside was a piece of paper that he had no idea I had found, a paper that would tear through every lie he had carefully laid out. I could hear his lawyer clearing his throat, trying to move things along, eager to wrap up what he clearly thought was a clean, simple case, mutual agreement, no assets hidden, no debts owed. Just a few signatures, and 20 years of love, struggle, loyalty, and sacrifice would vanish into a neat, forgettable line in a court docket. Still, I said nothing. Not yet. I met Adam's eyes across the room. For a flicker of a moment, just a flicker, he looked nervous. Then he winked, like this was some inside joke. A private performance only he and I were in on, and something inside me snapped. Quiet and final. Not with a bang, but like the steady snapping of a rope that's been pulled too tight for too long. I stood up slowly, smoothing the wrinkles from my skirt. My chair scraped against the tiled floor. The sound sharp. Drawing a few more curious glances, the judge looked up. "Your Honor," I said, my voice steady, almost gentle, like I was discussing the weather. "I believe there's been a misunderstanding." Adam's face paled. He shifted his weight from one foot to the other. No longer so sure of his own stage, he opened his mouth. But no words came out, because he saw what was in my hand. I walked to the bench, each step deliberate, each heartbeat a drum in my ears. When I reached the judge, I placed the folder in front of him. I didn't need to say much. The numbers spoke louder than any accusation ever could. $200,000, hidden neatly in an account I was never supposed to know about. Money siphoned from our joint investments over years. Disguised under a fake consulting firm he thought no one would bother to trace. The judge's eyebrows lifted. The room fell silent. Adam stumbled forward, trying to protest. But his voice cracked halfway through. No one was nodding at him anymore. No one was smiling. I simply stood there, hands folded in front of me again, breathing in the sharp, cold air of justice beginning to shift. And for the first time in a very long time, I felt steady, grounded, ready, because he had claimed the divorce was mutual. He had claimed we left with equal shares, equal dignity. But now, the truth was unfolding right there in front of everyone, and he couldn't script his way out of it this time. It started simple, like most things that end badly do. We were sitting on the floor of our first apartment, sharing a bowl of overcooked pasta and drinking wine out of mismatched mugs. The AC didn't work. The carpet smelled like someone else's dog, and the walls were so thin we could hear the neighbors fight about laundry. But we were in love, and when you're in love, those things feel like texture, not problems. Adam had just left his job at the bank. Said he couldn't stand the corporate game anymore. He wanted to build something real, something that was his. I believed him, not just because I loved him, but because I saw it in his eyes, the fire. He talked about starting his own consulting firm, helping small businesses grow smarter, not bigger. It was idealistic and unpolished and beautiful. He asked me what I thought, and I remember saying, "Let's try. I've got us." And I meant it. I was teaching full time back then. Middle school English. It didn't pay much, but it came with health insurance and a modest but steady paycheck. So I picked up some tutoring on the side, cut back on the little luxuries, took on more than my share of the bills while he worked 12-hour days building his dream. He would come home exhausted and full of ideas. I stayed up late helping him draft proposals, edit copy, find typos in emails. I cheered for his first client, and his second, and his third. There was pride in that. Quiet. Invisible pride. No one claps for the support beam that holds the house up, but without it, the roof caves in. We got married on a rainy September weekend in my sister's backyard. We didn't have money for a big event, but we strung up some lights and danced on the patio and promised each other everything. I remember how tightly he held my hands as he said his vows, voice cracking just a little. We both cried. When I got pregnant a year later, it wasn't planned. He looked scared. I was too, but we figured it out. I scaled back my hours, and we moved into a small fixer-upper on the edge of town. The nursery had a leaky window and wallpaper from the 80s, but we filled it with love. Those years were hard, but they were ours. And then, things shifted. It wasn't overnight. That's what made it harder to see. It started with him checking his phone more during dinner, staying late for meetings that didn't show up on his calendar, saying things like, "You wouldn't understand. It's a business thing." At first, I thought it was just the pressure. The company had grown. He had a team now. He started wearing suits that actually fit, talking like someone who had people. I wanted to be happy for him, and I was, but the space between us was growing, and I couldn't fill it fast enough. I'd bring it up gently, like, "Hey, you've been distant lately. Are you okay?" He'd shrug and say, "I'm just tired." Every time I tried to close the gap, he'd step back a little more. Then came the comments, subtle at first, almost playful, like, "Must be nice to nap during the day," or, "You don't really get how stress works until you're running a company." And I'd laugh, because what else do you do? You laugh when the man you love makes you feel small, because the alternative is crying. Sometimes, he'd complain about how tight things were financially. So I'd cut more corners, coupon, thrift, cancel my Pilates class. Meanwhile, he was coming home with new tech, new watches, and a second set of golf clubs he never used. Still, I didn't ask. I didn't want to be the wife who nitpicked. I wanted to be the woman who trusted. Even when I saw the envelope, a thick white envelope on his desk, addressed to a P.O. box I didn't recognize. When I asked, he said, "Just some paperwork for a client who's not local." I nodded. I wanted to believe him. God help me. I wanted to believe him so badly, because once you start asking questions, you open a door you can't always close. But it didn't stop there. One night, maybe a year before everything blew up, I was folding laundry in the living room while he sat on the couch, scrolling through his phone. I told him about a scholarship our son had been nominated for, a creative writing award. I was excited, proud. Adam didn't look up, just said, "That's cute." But creativity won't get him very far in the real world. My hand stopped mid-fold. I looked at him, really looked at him, and saw a man I didn't fully recognize. He used to cry at Pixar movies. He once wrote me a 4-page letter when we fought over burnt chicken. And now he couldn't even pretend to care. I started spending more time in the garden. It was the only place that felt quiet, safe. I'd talk to the tomato plants like they were old friends. Whisper my doubts to the soil and let the wind carry them somewhere else. It wasn't just the emotional distance. It was the erasure. I realized one day that I wasn't in any of his online bios. He was a self-made entrepreneur. No mention of the woman who paid rent when his business made $0. No wedding ring and photos. No family shots. Just sleek office setups and motivational quotes. At first, I brushed it off. Thought maybe he just wanted to keep work and personal life separate. But then a mutual friend sent me a flyer Adam was speaking at a business summit, under his picture. The headline read, "From Nothing to a Million, How I Built My Legacy Alone." Alone. That word felt like a slap. I reread the flyer 3 times, then went to the bedroom and sat on the edge of the bed for almost an hour. He walked in, dropped his bag on the floor, and I asked calmly, stupidly, "Did you forget to mention me on purpose? Or was I just never part of the story?" He looked at me, unblinking. "I'm not obligated to thank you every time I open my mouth." Then he went to shower. That night, I lay awake beside him, eyes open in the dark, wondering how long I'd been lying to myself, not about who he was, but about how far I was willing to shrink just to stay close to him. And the worst part, I didn't leave. Not then. Not after that. Because when you've spent years building something brick by brick, scar by scar, you don't walk away at the first sign of rot. You convince yourself it can be fixed. You water dead roots. You hope, and hope, and hope, until one day, you realize the house you're standing in isn't just broken. It was never yours to begin with. That was the moment something in me shifted. It was small, so small it didn't even register. Then. But looking back, it was the first crack in the wall I'd spent years pretending was solid. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just started remembering. What was his login for that shared savings account? Why did the quarterly tax forms show 2 different EINs who was M. Fraser? And why were they CC'd on invoices that had nothing to do with the business I didn't ask him? Not out loud. Instead, I started writing things down, filing copies, taking pictures, connecting dots. Because maybe I wasn't part of his story anymore, but I still knew how it started, and I was the only one who knew how it really should end. It started with a password. Not some dramatic confrontation or anonymous letter in the mail, no. It was just a moment. Quiet and almost forgettable. Like so many of the turning points in a crumbling marriage, I was looking for a tax form. It was the week before the deadline, and Adam had told me, as usual, that everything was handled, but the IRS had sent a letter about missing documentation, and I figured I'd just log in to our joint online file archive and pull the forms myself. Only the password had been changed. Twice. I tried every version we'd ever used. Birthdays, pet names, even that silly phrase we'd once joked about using Mango Giraffe, 1986. Nothing worked. So I asked, casually, "Hey, did you change the Dropbox login?" He didn't look up from his laptop. "Yeah, needed more privacy for work files." That was it. No apology, no new password, just the kind of dismissal that says you're not supposed to be in there anymore. I smiled, nodded, said, "Got it." And the next morning, while he was in the shower, I took back my access. It wasn't hard. I knew the backup email address. I reset the password and forwarded the recovery link to myself. My hands didn't even shake. Not then. I don't know what I expected. Maybe spreadsheets. Maybe something to confirm that he was just overwhelmed. Or had forgotten a few deadlines. What I didn't expect was an entire folder labeled MF Holdings, Archive. What I didn't expect were the bank statements. 5 years worth. From an account I'd never seen. In a bank I didn't know he used. Transfers. Regular ones. Quiet ones. $500 here. $200 there. $3, $1,000 on the first of every other month. I opened the first PDF. It was in his name, his signature, no joint access, no trace of my name. Our son's name, our address. It was clean and hidden, and at the bottom of the page, 207, 489, 73. I didn't move for what felt like an hour. Just sat there on the edge of the bed, laptop balanced on my knees, staring at numbers that somehow felt heavier than any betrayal ever spoken aloud. The thing is, it wasn't just the money. It was the fact that he planned it. Not a one-time slip, not a desperate decision. This I was a system. He had built a separate life. Dollar by dollar. Lie by lie. And I had helped. Every time I said, "We'll be fine." every time I offered to skip dinner out or buy groceries on sale. He wasn't just hiding money, he was hoarding freedom. Freedom from me. I didn't confront him. Not right away. Instead, I printed 3 statements. Just 3. Enough to confirm I wasn't imagining things. I placed them in a folder, black, slim, inconspicuous, and slid it under the lining of my old teaching tote bag. And then I acted normal. I made his coffee in the morning, kissed his cheek, packed his lunch one day. Like I used to years ago, he joked about it like it was cute. I smiled. But at night, after everyone was asleep, I dug deeper. There was a name that kept showing up on some of the transfers, Frazier and Associates. The first time I saw it, I thought it was a law firm. The second time, I started asking questions. I looked up the business ID number listed on one of the deposit slips. It wasn't a firm. It wasn't even a real business. It was a shell company, registered to a rented mailbox inside a UPS store 2 towns over. I drove there the next day. I didn't go in, I just sat in the parking lot across the street and stared at it. It was raining. I remember that. The kind of cold, misty rain that feels like the world is reminding you it doesn't owe you kindness. I watched 2 people come and go from that mailbox. Neither looked familiar. Neither was him. That night. I opened his wallet while he was in the shower. I hadn't done that in years. I used to think it was a violation. But that night, I just felt numb. Inside was a business card, one of those sleek, minimalist ones, black matte finish, white lettering. It said MF Holdings, Executive Strategy, Adam C. I turned it over. No phone number, just an email. An email that wasn't linked to any of our shared accounts. An email I'd never seen before. I typed the email into a search bar. Nothing. No LinkedIn. No social media. No business registry, but the domain, it matched the company that kept showing up on those transfers. MF Holdings wasn't just a clever name. It was a whole identity, one he had built outside of me. I checked the timestamps on the statements. They lined up with the exact periods when Adam had claimed things were tight. Every month he said we couldn't afford a vacation. He had quietly moved a few grand into that account. Every time he asked me to stretch the groceries another week. He was stacking cash behind my back, and I remembered a moment months earlier. I had been folding our son's school newsletter, prepping to send back the $20 for the class trip. Adam had walked by and casually said, "Maybe skip this one. He doesn't need to be coddled." I'd nodded. I'd agreed. And now I realized I'd been saying yes to crumbs while he banked full loaves. The weight of it didn't hit all at once. It landed slowly, piece by piece. Like a storm moving in over still water. Not loud, just final, still. I didn't scream. Didn't confront him at the dinner table. Didn't throw the papers in his face. I waited. I needed to be sure beyond a shadow of a doubt, so I began keeping a second phone. Just a cheap one. Prepaid. I emailed copies of documents to myself, screenshotted every page, took pictures of every file on his desk when he wasn't home, and I started building a digital folder labeled "For the Day He Calls Me Crazy." I even backed it up to a USB. Labeled it something he'd never touch: recipes, holiday 2013. I don't know what hurt more, what he did, or the fact that I had to become someone else just to survive under the same roof. But I wasn't broken. No, not this time. I wasn't going to cry on the bathroom floor or call a friend to ask if I was overreacting. Instead, I started watching him, really watching. How he smirked when he shut his laptop the second I walked in. How he used a tone I hadn't earned but one he reserved for subordinates. How he never once noticed that I had stopped asking questions, because I already had the answers. And then came the moment that made everything clear. It was a Friday. He was rushing out the door for a client dinner, another one of those vague, untouchable obligations he never explained. He kissed me on the cheek, said, "Don't wait up," and grabbed his keys. And right before he stepped outside, he turned and said, "You know, I really hope you don't make this difficult when we finally do this. I'd like to keep it clean. When we finally do this," he was talking about the divorce. I hadn't filed. We hadn't spoken about it. But clearly he was already making arrangements. Cleaning house, lining up whatever story he'd tell to the court. And in that moment, I understood he thought he was ahead of me. He thought I was still in the dark. He thought he could leave me with nothing but a hollow story about how it just didn't work out. So I said nothing. I smiled just barely and said, "Of course, Adam. I'd never make it messy." He left, and I stood there in the hallway, hand still on the doorknob, feeling something new, not anger, not sadness, not betrayal, something sharper, something quieter, resolve. That night, I pulled out the folder, the real one, the one with the statements, the email traces, the business registration, the phone records, the one that told the story he'd tried to bury under charm and spreadsheets. And I made 3 copies, one for me, one for my attorney, and one for the day he told the court it was mutual. The funny thing about revenge, real revenge, is that it never starts loud. It starts in silence. That Monday morning, I didn't wear black to the courthouse like I had planned. I wore beige, soft beige, a color so unremarkable it made me invisible, because I didn't need attention. I needed clarity, and the kind of power that doesn't shout it, whispers, and waits. He was already there. Of course. Perfectly put together. Navy blazer, polished shoes. That smug calm he always wore when he thought he'd won before the game even started. His lawyer greeted me with a nod. Cold. Practiced. Already bored. The courtroom was quiet. The kind of quiet that buzzes behind your teeth. And then Adam said it, like he was ordering coffee. "We've agreed to divorce on mutual terms. No contest. No need to drag things out." I didn't blink. Didn't even flinch. Because I had been waiting for that exact sentence. The judge looked at me. "Mrs. Callahan. Is this accurate? And for the first time in months?" I let the smile reach my eyes. I stood up, walked to the front of the courtroom, and placed the folder black, slim, lethal on the judge's bench. "Actually, Your Honor," I said quietly, "I believe we've skipped a few important details." Adam's smile faltered. His lawyer shifted. The judge opened the folder. First page, 5 years of transfers into a hidden account. Second page, a printed trail of emails from an unknown address tied to a shell company. Third, a notarized statement from a retired accountant who once managed the P. Oedi box, where MF Holdings received its mail. And the final page, an affidavit from a financial investigator confirming the legitimacy of my documentation. I didn't look at Adam. I didn't need to, because I heard it the way his breath caught in his throat. The way he leaned toward his lawyer, suddenly whispering. The judge looked up slowly. "Mr. Callahan, do you have an explanation for this silence?" "Mr. Callahan." More silence. Adam's lawyer finally stood. "Your Honor, we would like a recess to review these documents before continuing." I turned, met Adam's eyes, and for the first time since I married him, he looked small, not physically, not in stature, but in spirit. Like the armor he wore, built from years of arrogance and careful lies, had just cracked down the center. The recess was granted. 30 minutes. I sat in the hallway alone, sipping water from a paper cup, watching people file in and out of the elevators. Adam sat with his lawyer down the corridor, speaking in hushed tones and wild gestures. At one point, he looked over at me like he wanted to say something. I didn't break eye contact, didn't look away. But I didn't offer a smile, either, because I wasn't done. When we returned to the courtroom, the air had changed. Adam no longer looked like a man steering the ship. He looked like a man caught in his own storm, and I had brought the thunder. The judge addressed us both. "Given the nature of these findings, this will no longer be processed as a mutual divorce. Mrs. Callahan, do you wish to file for full financial disclosure and redistribution of assets?" "Yes, Your Honor, I do." Adam opened his mouth to object, but his lawyer gently touched his arm. It was over. He knew it, but I wasn't finished. "Additionally," I said, "there are minors' funds tied to our joint accounts. I request the court freeze all movement until the forensic audit is complete." and I have reason to believe that income reporting has not matched actual earnings for the past 3 years. I've already filed a preliminary report with the IRS. His lawyer's face went pale. So did Adam's. Because I hadn't just exposed the hidden account. I'd alerted the people who really don't appreciate being lied to. There was a moment, just a flicker, when I saw it in Adam's face. Not anger, not fear, grief. Not for the marriage, for the image, for the illusion of control he had spent years curating like a gallery piece. He used to call me his foundation. Now I was the earthquake he hadn't prepared for. The judge nodded, made several notes, then addressed the room. We'll begin a formal inquiry into the financial discrepancies. Mrs. Callahan, thank you for your thorough documentation. Court is adjourned until next hearing. And just like that, the power shifted, the courtroom emptied. Adam remained in his seat a beat too long, as if the shock hadn't quite worn off. His lawyer was already packing up, face like stone. I walked out without looking back, but I could hear it, his footsteps trailing mine. He caught up to me in the hallway, voice low and tight. What are you doing? Lauren, I turned to him, slowly, deliberately. What you didn't think I could. His eyes searched mine, maybe hoping to find the old version of me, the one who flinched when he sighed too loud or doubted herself when he raised an eyebrow. She was gone. You're going to ruin me, he said. I tilted my head, soft and cold all at once. No, Adam, you did that all by yourself. I'm just letting the light in. He opened his mouth again, but I walked past him before he could find the words. I didn't need them, because words were what he had always used to keep me in place. Smiling ones, subtle ones, sharpened ones dressed as kindness. Now, all I had were actions, and they spoke loud enough to drown him out. The next few weeks were a blur of hearings, paperwork, and silence. He didn't fight for custody, didn't contest the freeze order, didn't show up at one of the audits. Because now, every move he made was watched by the court, by the IRS, and, for the first time, by me with clarity, not confusion. I took the documents he once buried and turned them into keys, keys that unlocked the truth, keys that unraveled years of carefully stitched fiction, keys that reminded everyone, including him, that just because a woman is quiet doesn't mean she isn't paying attention. People called me brave, but it didn't feel like bravery. It felt like breathing again after holding it in for too long. And what made it sweeter, what made it whole, was that I didn't destroy him. I let the truth do that. No screaming, no public meltdown, no cruel revenge, just exposure, just evidence, just the weight of his own lies collapsing in on him under oath, on record, with my hands clean. That day in court, when he said, "We agreed to move on," he had no idea that I had moved on months before into strength, into clarity, into the version of myself he never thought I'd become. And when I handed the judge that folder, I wasn't just proving what he did. I was reclaiming what I was, his foundation. No, I was the architect all along. The funny thing about consequences is they don't always look like punishment. Sometimes they just look like silence. Phone calls that go unanswered. Friends who stop smiling the same way. Doors that used to open now left ajar, but never wide enough for you to walk through again. For Adam, it started with the IRS letter. A quiet envelope slipped into our mailbox 3 weeks after the court freeze. I didn't touch it. Just placed it on the kitchen table next to his coffee mug and went back to chopping vegetables. He didn't say anything when he saw it, just picked it up, skimmed the front, and walked out the door, left his coffee steaming and untouched. He was gone for hours. When he came home, he didn't look at me, just stood in the entryway, hands shaking slightly. The letter crumpled in his fist. That night, he slept on the couch. By the end of the week, there were more envelopes. Certified mail this time. His voice got quieter on the phone. His shoulders stayed tense. He stopped meeting friends for golf, stopped posting online, stopped pretending. Because it turns out, when you hide $200,000 and lie about it under oath, The problem isn't just your wife, it's the government. The audit began, and it wasn't just his fake consulting firm, it was his real one too. Turns out when you build a business on top of secrets, the foundation doesn't just crack, it rots. Two of his biggest clients dropped him within a month. One of them called me, not to apologize, but to tell me, quietly, that they always had a strange feeling, that they were sorry they hadn't listened to it sooner. Adam tried damage control, called in favors, spoke in soft tones on speakerphone late into the night, but the more he tried to fix it, the more it slipped away. By the time our next court date arrived, he looked 10 years older, gaunt, pale, eyes rimmed with exhaustion. I wore navy blue, simple, structured, a color I used to reserve for parent-teacher conferences and funerals. It felt right for both. The judge reviewed the updated filings. He spoke clearly, carefully, asset redistribution, back taxes, frozen accounts, spousal support adjustments. Adam didn't argue, didn't even raise his hand when the judge awarded me primary custody. Our son sat outside in the hallway, reading a comic book. He didn't ask for details afterward, but when we got in the car, he looked at me and said, "You don't look tired anymore." I didn't know whether to cry or laugh, so I just reached back, squeezed his knee, and drove us home. A month after the ruling, I bumped into one of Adam's former colleagues at the grocery store. She hesitated before saying hello, her eyes flicking toward the cucumbers in my cart like they were more comfortable to talk to than me. And then she said it. Everyone knows now about what he did. They're just not saying it out loud. I nodded once. That's all I needed, because the truth is, he wasn't publicly shamed. No scandal splashed across headlines, no viral video, but in every room he walked into, he had to wonder who knew, who had seen the filings, who had read between the lines, and that kind of doubt. That's a quiet kind of prison. No walls, no guards, just the sound of your own conscience echoing off the floor. He sold his car, the fancy one, the one he used to park at an angle just to catch the sunlight. He moved into a one-bedroom condo 2 towns over. Didn't even tell our son the address at first. I only found out because the utilities bill accidentally came to our house. When he came to pick up our son one Sunday, he waited at the curb instead of walking to the door. He used to just barge in. That day, he didn't even step on the porch. I handed over the overnight bag. Our son hugged me tight, then jogged off to the car. But Adam, he lingered, eyes tired, shoulders slumped, voice soft. "Lauren, He didn't finish. I let him try, let him sit in that silence and realize there were no words that would undo what had already been done. Finally, I said, "I don't need an apology." Adam, he looked surprised, maybe even relieved. But I didn't stop there. "I need you to raise our son with honesty. That's all." He nodded, slowly, swallowed whatever words were left in his throat, and then he drove away. At work, I got a promotion. It wasn't flashy, just a bump in pay and a new title, but it felt earned, because I didn't have to pretend to be small anymore. At home, I started planting again. Lavender, basil. 2 tomato vines that kept growing crooked no matter how many times I tied them straight. But they were mine, and that was enough. Some days, I still hear his voice in my head, polished, persuasive, perfectly detached. But now I answer with my own, clearer, kinder, wiser, because justice didn't look like him in handcuffs. It looked like me walking past the mirror without lowering my eyes. It looked like my son whispering, "I'm proud of you," as he watched me zip up my coat before work. It looked like standing in court and not shaking. It looked like peace, quiet, steady, and completely mine. There's a kind of quiet that settles in after the storm ends, not silence, but stillness, like the house isn't holding its breath anymore. I didn't wake up afraid that week, didn't brace myself before checking emails, didn't walk into my own kitchen wondering which version of my life I'd have to pretend to fit into. Instead, I made tea, real tea, loose leaf, steeped slow, no microwave shortcut. I sat at the table and let the steam touch my face. And for once, the quiet felt like company, not punishment. My son padded into the room, half asleep, dragging his blanket like he used to when he was 4. He didn't ask about his dad, didn't ask about court. He just crawled into my lap, knees too long now, elbows poking my ribs. "Are you happy?" he asked. It caught me off guard, not because he asked, but because I didn't have to fake my answer. "I think I'm learning how to be," I said, and he nodded like that made perfect sense. Happiness hadn't come in some grand epiphany or Instagram-worthy moment. It came in the small rituals, washing the sheets and hanging them in the sun, fixing the squeaky cabinet that Adam always said wasn't that bad, switching to a smaller toothpaste because I didn't have to buy the double pack anymore. There was freedom in choosing what I kept and what I let go of. I donated his old books, kept mine. Threw out the fancy wine glasses we never used and replaced them with hand-thrown mugs from a local artist. I used to think healing looked like forgetting. Now I know it looks like remembering without breaking. One Saturday, I ran into an old friend I hadn't seen in years. She looked at me for a long moment before saying, "You look different. Not thinner, not older, just different. I feel different." I told her, because somewhere along the way, I stopped trying to make sense of why he did what he did. I stopped holding my breath waiting for an apology. And I stopped treating my healing like a courtroom verdict that needed a signature to be valid. That's the thing. No one tells you about betrayal. Yes, it breaks something, but it also reveals something. What you're made of, what you can rise from, what you'll never tolerate again. And what I saw in myself wasn't someone ruined. It was someone rebuilt. Some nights, I still feel the weight of it. The years, the lies, the way I once made myself smaller just to make space for someone who was never going to meet me halfway. But now I carry that weight differently, like a scar, not an open wound. Because here's what I know now. Justice isn't always loud. Sometimes, it's a quiet kitchen, a warm mug, and a son who sleeps peacefully down the hall. Sometimes, it's simply not looking back. To anyone listening, especially the women out there who've been called dramatic, difficult, or too emotional, you are not imagining it. You are not too much. You are just finally refusing to be less. And to the ones still in the thick of it, still walking through the fog, still second-guessing your worth, I see you. I've been you. You're not lost. You're just shedding skin that no longer fits. Your story doesn't end in shame. It begins in remembering who you were before they told you who to be. So if you've been through something like this, I'd love to hear your story below. And if someone you know needs to hear this, send it to them. We rise better when we rise together. And if you want more stories that remind you healing is possible, feel free to subscribe. Sometimes, justice isn't a gavel or a headline. It's peace. And peace starts when you realize you didn't just survive. You bloomed.